Okay, thank you. Um, yeah, again, based on some of the work that we've been doing within the multi-country working group and some of the other activities that have been ongoing, we got involved in some of the European activities, and there are essentially two. One of them is the MyHealth EU sphere, where we talk about services between countries, cross-border services. And that's the first part I'll talk about. And then there's the additional ongoing work at the XT-EHR level, where we're talking about European specifications for products, etc., EHR systems, etc., and how we're going to deal with that. So,
could I stop you, because
yeah,
we really have to sync up the audience, because it took me 9 months to understand those two pieces that you quickly described.
Okay. Yeah.
And we need to really reinforce with the audience so people understand what they are. If you say MyHealth EU, it used to be called EHDSI, for those who may know, it is the cross-border service which is already in operation. But if you do cross-border under the MyHealth EU, and the eHealth data space is covering both the cross-border and the intra-border, or the national deployment and the national EHR that have to comply with a future spec, the two should overlap.
Indeed. Yeah.
First question.
Yeah.
Second question, you've mentioned XT-EHR. What is XT-EHR in relationship to MyHealth EU, and XT-EHR in relationship to EHDS intra-border?
Okay. I'm still learning. Essentially, the starting point for all of this has been the HN guidelines. So we revert back to the guidelines that have been produced. We have the one guideline for imaging. There are 4 others for the other kinds of domains that we're talking about: patient summary, lab report, etc., prescription, etc. The relationship between these ultimately is that the MyHealth EU is providing this underlying service for the cross-border exchange, taking into account things like the need to transcode or translate the payloads that are being sent across the borders, so that in terms of structured data, the text associated with a given code could be translated from Spanish into French, etc., as part of the transcoding activity. There's a need also cross-border to highlight the logging. There are 2 aspects to the requirements that we have. One is to do involving the interoperability. How are we actually going to exchange information? And there's a second requirement on to do with logging, to do with security. Who did what, when, why, etc., that kind of thing. And that is also an aspect of the MyHealth EU. The audit trail would be managed by these national contact points to know what data was transferred across the borders, etc. When it comes to the XT-EHR aspects of this, what we're looking at there is putting together specifications for EHR systems to try and ensure that the data that we capture, the data that we store, the data that we exchange, and the data that we view is consistent across a given domain, across a given use case. So there'll be requirements in the XT-EHR level which will identify the sorts of data that we need to store, the data set, if you like, and the format of that data, whether you're talking about a piece of data being a date format or an identifier, that kind of thing needs to be specified. We need to have that clear. So we need to ensure that each of these EHR systems that are going to comply to the XT-EHR specifications has the ability to store the required information in the right way, and then go on to exchange that information. Now that that exchange of information is also uniform cross-border. So once we try and transfer from within a country through the national contact points, ideally we have the same content for a given use case that the national contact point can understand, so it can then do the transcoding necessary to move the data on, and it can be received in the other country for further usage or viewing purposes. So there's a relationship in how all of this data has to be identified, defined, that has to cross, intra country and also cross-border. So we're trying to set up the same kind of specifications for these. Where we are today is that we have these two aspects. There's been some work done at the MyHealth EU level. There's been a proof of concept done on medical imaging, which has been done to support the same use case. This is the standard imaging use case taken from the EHN guideline. The request and retrieval of imaging studies and reports. This part is cross-border, so we have to handle that. And there's been this POC done in order to test the technology that could be used for that. And what we have is, just to go back onto the use case, and I think it may be familiar to you, but there's essentially a number of stages across this where the use case is split up into essentially 4 parts, where we query for data. First of all, we need to find out what is known about a given patient from the country of affiliation, country A, in country B, the country of treatment. That is done by querying through these gateways, through the NCP gateways, using certain metadata for searching purposes. Once that yields a certain number of responses, a certain number of matching entries from your country of affiliation, that will give you then section 2, the point 2 here, where you have a list of studies, imaging studies and reports that are known about that patient. And from there, it's then you have sufficient information to then make the choice which of this study information, which of these reports that I've retrieved across the gateways, the NCPs, is actually relevant for the treatment I now want to give. And the choice from that is taken from the metadata that's displayed as part of the responses to the query. And also, when we get to the imaging level, we'll choose a given study that seems to be of interest. We'll pull back the manifest. And from the contents of the manifest, things that we talked about earlier about the additional kind of information stored within the manifest, like a series description and so on, you can actually make a choice of which underlying study would be of interest to be retrieved. And so section 4 then is the actual retrieval of that. So the use case is to try and map these requirements to a given technology, to a given technique. And as I say, what we're talking about at the moment is the blue box, if you like. We're talking about, for the MyHealth EU, it's literally what is the specification between NCPs, so between country A and country B. And what we had was that when we started doing this POC, we're working with the NCP solution provider. They are actually implementing this. They're implementing the proof of concept. When we got involved, it was quite apparent that they weren't entirely sure how to deal with imaging. It seemed to be that to them, it was something a little bit new. They'd heard about images. They were wondering, how can we retrieve them, etc. They had done some work previously on lab reports, on retrieving lab reports, bringing those back across from NCP, from country A to B, in another proof of concept. So when we got actually talking to them, we highlighted the use case that we were supporting across border, and we said that, well, one of the ways of doing this is to actually have the need to, in both solutions here, I'm going to talk about two different analyses that we did on this before we really started the implementation. In both cases, we need to identify the patient. We need to start off with a known national identifier for the patient that has been verified. Once we have that, we can then use that patient identifier as part of our query criteria to then try and find out what is known about that patient in country A. And so one option is that we then search for that patient, trying to just using the just simple metadata as return values. So we can search, for example, by saying, for this patient, for this date range, we're actually interested in CT exams for a particular body part, for the upper body. So those sorts of things can be used as search criteria when you make your initial query. That will bring back a number of results. And so that's like step one, is to make this initial query. The results that are returned will be matching reports and manifests that can then be used in a second step, where you then use the manifest content to, you retrieve the manifest and use the content to make the choice of which study part am I actually interested in. So the third part of this is knowing the study part that, that you're interested in based on the description from the manifest. You can then retrieve the images. So this analysis we felt was what we call the three-step approach. And this seemed to match immediately with other approaches that had been done before. When we actually got into discussions, there was a proposal to introduce what we called a two-step approach, where the first part is exactly the same. We have to identify the patient. Once we know the patient, there was a discussion then to say, okay, let's do some searching, but instead of just returning a lightweight list of metadata to then allow you to make your choice of what is relevant, this approach introduced the idea of as well as returning matching metadata, let's also return the manifest content immediately. Now, what that led to was the need to actually the need to search for manifests that belong to the matching criteria, to access those and to pull back the content of those as part of the initial query. And then the final part of this would be, once you have your manifest, just like in the three-step approach, that you would then make your selection of which images are relevant and then retrieve those images. So there was a discussion at the beginning of this POC on one way or the other. This approach was talking about using a sort of a fire imaging study kind of approach, where you would then pull fire imaging study references back into the country B. The previous one is the metadata plus a manifest as stored in a DICOM cost format. So we went through, we had a discussion at quite length within the development team, within the solution provider, and other member countries that were involved in this product, or in this POC. And we did an analysis, and there's a link here. I won't actually show the analysis now, but we went through the analysis of what were the pros and cons of the three-step approach versus the two-step approach. And one of the main things, or a couple of things that came out of it, there's a requirement to use FHIR where possible. This is an EU requirement, so this transcends both the two and three-step approaches. There's a requirement to be as efficient as possible in terms of speed, retrieval, retrieve as minimum amount of information necessary to allow choices to be made. There's a requirement to make use of international standards and profiles. And what we saw, and also from the privacy side and security, that you should only really be accessing information that is relevant to the treatment you're wanting to give. So we shouldn't actually be accessing information unnecessarily. And what we saw in the two-step approach was one of the drawbacks there was that because we're actually retrieving manifest information and bringing it back as part of our general query at the beginning, it could be that those manifests were never going to be used. They'd never be chosen. So you're actually accessing data, you're accessing information that would never be used as part of the treatment process. So that led us to believe that from the auditing point of view, from the point of view of who is accessing what information, there was an additional overhead there that was unnecessary and could be seen as being unwanted in terms of the privacy and data consistency point of view. when we made a provisional conclusion in our analysis that by looking at these various things, and you can read this document, that there was a choice where the three-step approach would be adopted for the POC based on the findings that we had. That actually introduces, on the query side, from the technical point of view, the use of a FHIR document reference as part of the query, and it matches the IHE MHD profile, which again is an international profile and standard and so on. When we looked at this, we also asked for feedback from the member countries that were involved in the POC, that were interested in joining the discussions on the POC. And we asked them to analyse or to review the analysis and to come back with review comments, and in addition to that, also an alignment, a choice of which of the two would you consider to be appropriate in your own country. And we had 11 responses, where 8 were in favour of the three-step approach. 2 were sort of undecided, and 1 was against that. So based on that feedback, we went ahead with the POC, and that in turn has been finished. It was a POC that was started quite late on last year, sort of October time in terms of implementation, November time, and they managed to achieve a demonstration version of this, where they were able to query using IHE MHD the document reference query. That would then allow them to use the metadata to query in terms of patient identifier, modality type, and body part, etc. Get a list back of matches, make the choice then of imaging report and imaging manifest, retrieve the imaging manifest, decode that, and eventually make the choice of which part of the study should be retrieved. And the first 2 parts of the query and the retrieval of report and manifest were done using the MHD profile, as is described in the IHE framework. And the retrieval of the images was done using the WADO RS RESTful service to allow a choice of study to be retrieved, or the series part of the. So that has actually been done. Obviously, you have to realise that communication is just between the 2 NCPs. So on the back end, it would normally, via the NCP adapter, would be connected to the national or the national infrastructure of country A, the land of affiliation, and the front end of the land B would be the country of treatment and be attached to their national infrastructure. In the POC, of course, there was the sandbox for the back end, the country affiliation. So there was a FHIR server set up that was loaded with data to support the queries and the retrieval of the report and manifest information. And there was a PACS set up that was able to support the WADO RS for the retrieval of the imaging data. And we were then able to, as part of the POC, make the retrieval and put the images into a viewing application in Land B. So we were able to literally transfer the images across. It was just done simply to test the technique that was being proposed. So that was one aspect of it that's been completed. We need to do further analysis on that now. The team is going to take that further in terms of fully documenting what has been done, making the specifications, etc., of what is being done within the MyHealth EU for the imaging service. Secondly to that, there is this XT-EHR activity, and that is being done based on the 5 EHN guidelines, as I mentioned, one of which being patient summary and so on. One of those guidelines is to do with one of the prioritized services, which is the medical imaging studies and reports. That is set up in what they call a task D7.2. D7.1 is the lab reports and so on. For example, I think the D6 tasks are patient summary and prescription, and D7.3 is the hospital discharge report. So we're following the nomenclature that's being used by the EHR projects. We are currently working on this D7.2 medical imaging studies. And again, this is based on the original EHN guideline. And as part of that, what we're seeing is that the scope of it is such that we are using the use case 1, which we've talked about significantly this afternoon. So that's the basis of the exchange. The use case is the exchange of the medical imaging report. We're talking about, as part of this, the data sets which are described in the EHN guideline. There's a data set describing the expected support for imaging reports in terms of what data should be stored for header information, which is typically metadata, and what should be in the body of a report, so the real content, the nitty-gritty of the report. There's also a data set described in that EHN guideline for the imaging study manifest. And as I said, that's in the multi-country working group work that we've done. We had a look at that data set for the study manifest, and this is where we've seen that there could be some additions needed in terms of to the DICOM standard definition of the COS manifest object. So what you see then, the title of the document, the specifications document that we have to write is here. And you can see that it's imaging studies and related imaging reports using the format. And it's the requirements, both functional and technical, and specifications for the EHR systems that have to eventually be defined in this document specific to medical imaging studies and related reports. There's a whole table of contents for this document. The table of contents aligns with all the other domains, so the patient summary, the prescription, and so on. They all have the same structure to their documents. And currently what we're working on ourselves is on the implementation guideline, which is part 9 of this document that's being produced. It's very early days yet. We're still trying to figure out what exactly should be in here, how are we going to document it, and so on. We're working at a European level with the different sort of minor working groups within the total T7.2 package, if you like. We're specifically involved at the moment with this 9.3 section here, which is the technical specifications. And as part of that, we've as an initial piece of work, we've put together a specification for a cost-based manifest. We're calling it an XT-EHR EHDS manifest. That specification is pretty much done now. There is other work being done in separate working groups on the data model, so the data sets that are needed, again based on what was identified in the EHN guideline. And there, when it comes to the data modeling, the data sets, what we're looking for is to try and make sure that we work together with other parties that are working on similar things. At the moment, within IHE RAD, there is a new profile in development for the image diagnostic report. It's FHIR-based. It's obviously then a bundle of resources. It's structured and so on. And that seems to be a good starting point for an alignment with the requirements that we would have as part of this XT-EHR work. So we're hoping that there will be an alignment done with that work to make sure we're not doing things twice. Obviously, there will be gaps in various profiles, etc. Let's try and find what those gaps are. Let's try and work to fill those. And in addition to that, when it looks at the data model, as I mentioned, there's like a header description described in the EHN guideline on reports. And that leads to the need to describe that metadata in a way that we can reuse. And there, what we're looking at is describing this metadata in terms of the document description itself and metadata that could be used to search for that document. And that work is being done in conjunction with another subgroup called working in section 5, so the D5.2, which is the requirements for metadata. And what we would like to do is obviously align that information across the board. So at the moment, it's fairly early days. There are certain pieces of work that are being done. A lot of it is based on the current, the POC that was identified earlier. We're learning from that. We're going to take that information further. The need, of course, is, as we've said, is on the data sets, the need to align on what is it that we actually need to store in an EHR system when we're creating an imaging report. What is it that we need to then transfer? What is it we need to be able to manipulate or update in a consumer system? What is it that we need to view? So there's a whole lot of aspects to this that we need to cover. So that, in a nutshell, is where we are with that. What I would like to do is just take you a little bit further in what might happen now based on what we've learnt from the POC in terms of the transactions, the possibilities for an alignment across domains. And what we've learnt is from this three-step approach, as you'll see that if you look into the document, the 3 steps where searching, retrieving manifests, and then retrieving the underlying images. We see that there is some commonality there that could be used as a more generic approach, where the first 2 of these 3 steps, so the search for information, what is known about a patient for whatever purpose in country A, and the retrieval of that information, that actually is generic and could be applied across other domains. And so we're seeing that you've got the query side, we've got the retrieve. This could actually be used, the same techniques could be used to pick up a single patient summary, some medication information, lab reports, etc. And so this is where we are hoping, maybe we're trying to align some of the work that we're doing. And what it essentially means is if you map this to the technique that was used earlier, which is then this FHIR MHD, there are transactions identified as part of that standard, part of that profile, which allow you to make a query. It's a document reference FHIR resource. It's getting quite technical now, of course. It's a document reference resource which has search parameters as a possibility to identify a given match. And if we assume that for all cases we need our patient identifier, that's taken, we need to pick that up in any way possible. There may be a date range that is useful to include. Then we can see that for the different domains that we're talking about, this find document references could be used as a way of querying for information for a patient summary, for some medication information, for lab, for the hospital discharge reports, and for imaging. The main difference being is that the generic part of your query is generic, of course, it stays the same. It would be a patient identifier, possibly a date range, and there may be then the chance to supplement that with a specialized search metadata for your particular domain. For example, in the imaging, that we could add, onto a search body part and a modality type. And so we can see that the same underlying transaction could be used in order to retrieve different kinds of information. If that was the case, then what you can see is that this is a screenshot I took from another document I've seen on an EHDS requirements skeleton. And it was just a bit of a mock-up of a user interface. So what you may see as the results of making such a query. Because you've used the same query, and in a very simple case, you could just say, for this patient ID, just tell me, give me everything that you've got. You could get a list back of different types of domain information. So you could get a patient summary back, you could get a lab report back, and so on. So just by taking this approach, we do open up the possibilities of having a more generic way in which we can retrieve the data. The same when it comes for actually retrieving the documents. Once you know which document it is that you would like to retrieve, there is an MHD transaction identified, which allows you to basically do the RESTful GET on a document URL, and that will literally pull back that document in the format that you agree, so on the acceptable format type, and so on. And that, again, could be applied to the various domains that we're talking about. And that fulfills the second step of our thing here, where we're actually retrieving information. The final thing is, and it's really the only difference when it comes to imaging, we need to go a step further, because at this point in time, we've only retrieved the manifest. We only know what the underlying study contains. We actually haven't retrieved any images yet. And this is where, sorry, there's a few notes at the bottom there. But this is where, for imaging, you would then, in addition to that, is use the RESTful WIA RAD 107 transaction, which has been defined. And that allows you then, using a URL, you can identify either the retrieval of a study, a series, or individual instances. And essentially what that would allow you to do then is pull back your images for whatever purposes, whatever consuming purposes there are. And that could be just displaying in a viewer. It could be for making measurements for stuff. It could even be then input to some kind of AI application, whatever. You've got literally a copy of the original DICOM images in there. So this is a proposal where we're thinking, okay, from the lessons that we've learned so far, the need to make use of international standards and frameworks and profiles, we're wondering if it's possible to align the approaches for the various domains that have been handled so far. And what that would lead to is a picture a little bit like this, where even across the NCPs then, you would have this ability to use the same technique for whatever it was that you wanted to retrieve. And as I said earlier, one of the differences here in terms of what does the NCP need to do, it has to sort of intercept, if you like, the queries and the responses, and maybe do some transcoding. So it has to understand the content. So we need to align the content or align specifications for the content at the NCP level with what we're trying to do at the XT-EHR level in terms of content descriptions, because it may have to make these changes in using the transcoding, etc., and language translations. It also, the NCPs are, as I've mentioned, are responsible for the audit logging, etc., as well, as to what traffic is going over the country boundaries and why, and so on. So this is what we're seeing as a possibility. We're proposing this. We have to see in how far it might be accepted. But essentially that's where we're looking at the moment. So based on what we've seen, and based on reusage and avoiding duplicate work, this is a proposal for a future way of working. And so with that, I'll finish on that one. I don't know if there are any questions. Apologies if I didn't explain the MyHealth EU and the XT. It's still, for me, a learning curve as well. I'm still trying to find out how all these things fit together. But what I have seen in the work that we've done so far is that if we're not careful, it could be that we end up doing things in different ways. And it could be, it may be difficult to reverse that at some point in time. So it's just something I think that we should try and avoid if possible. But obviously, it has to be a goal that we all want to achieve. So I don't know if there are any questions further. If not, then I think we're almost at the end, Charles.
No, we have a general
Okay.
question session now.
Okay.
You can, stay